So communism works hand in glove with capitalism. Now they call it socialism. You've never heard any of the big bankers ever decry socialism. They're only too happy to lend to governments as much as they want. Out of nothing anyways, thin air. And because they live off the massive interest which can't be paid. They live awfully well off the interest alone. That's not bad for a con of something you don't give them at all, except a bunch of numbers. But you get real benefits, real material goods back in return at compound interest. That's how you live off it. But very few folk can actually figure it out. And of course, they're never going to change this system. The bankers always plunder the planet at least twice every century. At least twice every century. Look at the history. And they won't fix it because they want it to happen again, because they use it to further their power and grip across the planet. And there'll be more crashes yet. There's some of them scheduled to come. They've already set the laws on the books so that they can plunder the accounts of the public. Now here's an example here too of progress, because under progress, as a guise to protect the crew that's doing it, they always have to stand up for everybody else under the guise of discrimination. And we've seen the rise of the feminists for a long time too. That's one of the first groups, in fact, the Marxists says that they would use was the creation of feminist movements, which they did. Because you can't really destroy the family unit unless you really get a lot of women to be anti-male and so on. And they did a good job of that. Now it's taught in school as a normal thing. But then we get them promoted further into the military and so on. And then you get the CIA selects new head of clandestine service, passing over the female officer who they'd all backed for the job. And it says, this is a great thing for a testimony, isn't it? For the US. Not that the US is the only country doing this. But it's a CIA officer who was the first woman to lead the agency's clandestine service, but was also directly involved in its controversial interrogation program, meaning torture. Will not get to keep that job as part of a management shake-up announced Tuesday by CIA Director John O'Brien, it says here. It says the officer who is undercover served as director of the National Clandestine Service on an interim basis over the past 2 months, and many consider her a frontrunner to keep the post, which involves overseeing the CIA's spying operations worldwide. And it says here that apparently she was involved, and it leaked out somehow or another, in torturing people over in Thailand on behalf of the US in some torture facility they had there. But the thing is, it's just a great thing to be proud of or something. Equality for sadists. Think about it, folks. You understand, when we've all become, it's bad enough when we're guys doing it, but when you get women in too, it's like the game's over. There's no balance to anything now. There's no counterbalance to the nastiness. And this has been lauded, of course, as a great thing that she can do this. And then getting back to the bankers, it says, now, can you believe it? And this, with all with this great thing called economists, the economists that run the world, the science of economy, and all their degrees and all the rest of it, they can't stop this kind of thing from happening. Dollar slides on George Soros' speculation ahead of the reserve meeting. Now, he's sunk countries before, him and a couple of his pals, because they set up the system and they haven't changed it. So that when big heads of banks are going to meet together, they speculate on if their money is going to rise or fall. And they make profits off of it. And they can help sink it by losing confidence of investors, just by announcing what they're doing. So it says a senior currency strategist says a half-cent dip in the Australian dollar since yesterday afternoon is unlikely to have much to do with rumours that billionaire investor George Soros is shorting the currency. That's what they call it. Shorting the currency. I'll go back into this one when I come back after this break. Hi folks, we're back cutting through the matrix. I'm talking about this article about George Soros. And it says rumours swirled around markets yesterday evening that billionaire US investor George Soros may have taken a $1 billion short position against the currency, betting against the currency. of Australia. Mr. Soros famously profited from successfully shorting the British pound early in the 1990s, despite attempts by the Bank of England to prop the currency up, that they borrow billions to bail themselves out, because Soros and two of his buddies had shorted basically the pound by design and purpose to reap in a massive profit. Now, what kind of system would they set up in the first place to allow these guys to do this? Well, who set it up in the first place? If you went to Rothschild and all the rest of it, these guys who run it all. And it's set up to be raped and plundered and manipulated. So billions of people across the world literally are in the hands of a few who play with them. And they call this a science that we're all supposed to believe in, economy and economics. And yet all the best economists at the top can't see it all coming, and they don't stop and plug all the loopholes. Why do you think so? It's not meant to be plugged. It's not your system, folks. It's not your system. It's for the likes of Soros and so on. That's what it was set up for. That's why they don't stop and plug up the loopholes, allow them to do what they do. And why is your currency up there getting tossed around the planet anyway to speculators to deal with? What's the point in working for a living and saving up and all the rest of it when these characters can smash you in a single blow as they profit and laugh? And Soros even boasted about how he did it in half a page in the British newspapers the last time. Boasted about it. Quite legal. It's quite legal. Yeah. And we're supposed to think we're living in a sane society. It is sane, but it depends how you look upon it and whose side you look upon it from. For those that run it. That's as simple as that. And also, too, this article about Australia, again, it's the South Australian property agents are targeting the Asian markets. It's all about the Chinese, very wealthy people moving into Australia, buying up all the top real estate there. And it's set up that, as I said before, the Royal Institute of International Affairs, through the Institute for Pacific Relations, one of their branches, has been working for 80-odd years to eventually merge the country, to get the whole trade group in the Far East as under one trade group. And they've done it now. And now, of course, Australia and New Zealand come under the tutelage, basically, of China as the boss. All set up by the boys in London, the city of London. I'll put that up tonight, too. And also, this article too, it says bank deposits of over 100,000 euros may be at risk. Now this is the mantra. As I've told you, news is also meant to prepare you for things, psychologically. Without you being aware of it, that's what it's about. But it says bank deposits of over 100,000 euros may be at risk. It says proposals under the Irish presidency to deal with European bank collapses are likely to bail in, which is rob the large depositors. And so deposits of that are likely to go in the event of future European bank collapses, according to a proposal put forward by the Irish presidency of the European Council ahead of a key meeting of finance ministers next week. Discussions on the controversial bank resolution regime, which is likely to see savers with deposits over 100,000 euros bailed in as part of future bank wind-downs. I like the terms that they rob you as part of bank wind-downs, are due to intensify this week in Brussels, in Europe, ahead of Tuesday's meeting, which will be chaired by Minister for Finance Michael Noonan. We'll try to get some guidance from ministers about the possible design of the bailout tool. I mean, it's all getting prepared to plunder depositors. And no one's saying, hey, this is all wrong, got to stop it right now. No one's saying this. It's the opposite. They're all saying we've got to do this. We've got to get it all legal so they can plunder each country's currency and their savings of depositors. And so it says here that the Irish Times takes no responsibility. Under a compromise text proposed by the Irish presidency, uninsured deposits of over 100,000 euros will be stolen in the event that a bank is resolved, but the depositors would rank higher than other creditors in the event of a wind down. In this scenario known as deposit preference, depositors would rank at the very end of the process, with other creditors first absorbing losses. I mentioned before too that Bill Gates, the other day, I mentioned that Bill Gates was one of the big investors in one of the big banks in Ireland. Of course, he was bailed out. And this is what they're talking about. They'll bail them out first, the big boys that hold their bonds, you see. But they'll steal your money as a depositor. You're at the end of the queue as a depositor. Not bad, eh? And you think you're living in some sort of the just society. Isn't that they keep telling you, the good society, democracy? Well, and also this article from Business Week says, finance ministers will hold talks next week on proposed European Union rules for writing down failing banks' creditors amid splits over the status of uninsured depositors and the powers that should be handed to national regulators. Do you vote for national regulators? No. Do you get a chance to? You don't know who they are? Of course you don't. Democracy, right? The treatment of uninsured depositors remains a key issue, particularly after recent events, according to a document prepared by Ireland. It's the same article, but in a different, tells you a bit more information about it. And it says the EU leaders have set a June deadline for governments and the European Parliament to agree on the text of a bank failure law. So here's a law coming in June, and you can guarantee after that they'll start plundering the banks. This is aimed at taking taxpayers off the hook for rescues. In the absence of such a system, nations have injected 1.7 trillion euros into their banking system since the 2008 collapse of the Lehman Brothers Holdings Inc., according to European Commission data. The big bankers sunk us, and now they're plundering us all again. Back with more after this break.
You're listening to the Republic Broadcasting Network, because you can handle the truth.
Hi folks, we're back cutting through the matrix, reading about all the rules that are being readied for the big next round of bank collapses as they plunder depositors' savings. In order to save the big boys at the top, these are the guys with hold all the bonds and so on. And it's talking about this in Business Week, which is a harmonized approach. It says national officials clashed on the design of the write-down rules at a meeting of the ambassadors last week, according to a European official. While governments, including the UK and France, argue that the write-down rules will be ineffective unless regulators have the power to adjust them according to circumstances. That means they've got to make sure that the big boys get paid first. Some other nations are concerned that this discretion could fuel uncertainty and lead to a patchwork of approaches across a 27-nation bloc. Now, this is the readiness. Remember, we're talking about the readiness to plunder the banks again, which is your savings. And it says many member states consider that the major drawbacks to the harmonized approach, it's a harmonized theft. That's pretty good, isn't it? Is the inability to deal with unforeseen events, and that the absence of flexibility may result in the resolution authority in avoiding or being unable to use the bail-in tool, the theft tool, according to the document. And it says Ireland is also seeking guidance from governments on what rules should govern the use of national bank-financed funds, which will be set up under the law to help cover costs at failing lenders. It says while provisional versions of the legislation would allow only these so-called resolution funds to be tapped after creditors have been written down, there are a small number of member states who would like a greater flexibility in the use of resolution fund to allow it to be used for direct solvency support. So, it's all being readied, and I can't tell you gleefully enough, article after article, that the top central bankers, private central bankers, all under the Bank for National Settlements in Europe, are getting this law passed in June to allow them to plunder every bank across the whole of Europe and make it the new normal. The new normal, folks. And here's a good article on it too. It says the Cyprus bank bail-in is another crony bankster scam, it says. A new strategy has been unveiled around the world with the first test run in Cyprus. Despite early denials, the bail-in strategy, which is the theft of your deposits for insolvent banks, has already become official policy throughout Europe and internationally as well. At first glance, the bail-in resembles a normal capitalist process of liabilities restructuring that should occur when a bank becomes insolvent. Equity investors and most junior creditors lose everything. Less junior creditors get a debt equity conversion, and senior creditors get 100%. The bank can remain in operation and does not have to liquidate any assets. No public money is required. He says, I've been an advocate of restructuring insolvent banks according to these basic capitalistic principles, which requires no public funds. The difference with the bail-ins, the theft, is that the order of creditors' seniority is changed. In the end, it amounts to the cronies, other banks and governments, and non-cronies. The cronies get 100% or more bailed out. The non-cronies, including non-interest-bearing depositors who should be super senior, get a kick in the guts instead, it says here. It says all insured deposits in individuals and legal entities up to 100,000 euros have, as of March 26, been transferred from the Lackeys Bank to the Bank of Cyprus. In addition, the entire amount of deposits belonging to financial institutions, the government, municipalities, municipal councils and other public entities, insurance companies, charity schools, educational institutions and deposits belonging to JICC Payment Systems Limited have been transferred to the Bank of Cyprus. That's how it looked in Cyprus. Is all other deposits exceeding 100,000 euros remain in the bad Lackeys Bank. Did you get that? Financial institutions such as the general banks and central banks, including the Bundesbank, get full repayment along with government entities, while everyone else gets to eat sand. If you're robbing a bank, would you take only a little of the money in the vault? No, you would take all of it. The bankers see it the same way when they rob you. Once they have performed the initial crime of sticking the losses with the non-crony creditors, who are generally senior, while the cronies, who are generally junior, get out scot-free, you might as well keep going. It says this can take a number of forms. It says one is the possibility that the assets of the bank will be sold at fire sale prices to other cronies. A bad loan might not be worth the full 100 cents in the dollar, but it might have a reasonable economic value of 50 cents. That's when Soros would buy up. Sell the loan to a crony for 5 cents, and the crony effectively gets 45 cents of instant profit, a nice 10 times the gain. It says the losses are taken by the non-crony creditors. This is one reason why I generally do not recommend liquidation, but rather continuation as a going concern for insolvent banks. Another strategy is loan write-downs. Crony borrowers effectively get loan forgiveness, and you no longer owe anything money. Instead, the crony borrowers might get the loans due to advance information just before the bank's restructuring. The loan forgiveness ends up as losses for non-crony creditors. This has already happened in Cyprus, with investigations have already begun regarding loan write-offs for local lawmakers. And it goes on and on and on. It's quite a good article, actually. I'll put it up tonight. It gives a more detailed breakdown of how this chronology works. And I mentioned this for a long time, that governments are just tools for private institutions, starting with the banks at the top, on top of the international lenders. They set up the Royal Institute for International Affairs, the private club they belong to that runs the world. And it says, new rule signals kiss of death for pensions. They had to go after the pensions because, you see, these big bankers have used the pensions of people that they paid in 40, 50 years of their lives and invested them and reinvested them thousands of times over, raked off incredible money off them in interest. And then the guy at the end of the road gets a little pittance of a pension at the end. But it's too much for them, according to the big boys now. It says, new rule signals a kiss of death for pensions. So a little-known rule that changed that allows companies to contribute fewer dollars to pension funds is signaling just how meaningless the retirement vehicle has become. This proves that pensions are pretty much dead, said Greg McBride, chief economist at Bankrate.com. The change is just another charade to mass underfunding of pensions and increases the odds of having less money for retirement. It's not necessarily the immediate end of pensions, but it's not good for them, and it's certainly a bad sign, he said. The pension change was all part of a transportation bill called Moving Ahead for Progress. There you go. See, progress again. The buzz terms in the 21st century, or MAP 21. Passed by Congress last June, the change became mandatory this year. In essence, MAP 21 lets employers put less money in their pension plans by allowing them to value their liabilities. What they have to pay out to pensioners as a liability using a 25-year average of interest rates instead of current rates. When interest rates are low, like now, pension plan liabilities are estimated to be higher, and companies have to put in more money. When rates are higher, the liabilities are figured to be smaller, and employers' contributions are less. The 25-year average is expected to be at least 2 to 3 percentage points higher than rates today. The reduced amount that companies will be putting in has to be figured out by each firm based on the higher rates, but Madison Pension Services, a consulting firm, has reported that some minimum pensions contributions in 2012 were reduced by 33%. And it goes on and on and on with more data here, lots of links to it too. A very good article that folks should read in the US, but it's happening elsewhere too. Also, this article ties right in with pensions and so on. And again, it's a blatant attack on the elderly itself. Understand, if you're elderly now, you should really be scared, because they're after not just your pension, they don't want you to live anymore. I'm not kidding about that. The eugenicists don't want you to live anymore. So communism works hand in glove with capitalism. Now they call it socialism. You've never heard any of the big bankers ever decry socialism. They're only too happy to lend to governments as much as they want. Out of nothing anyways, thin air. And because they live off the massive interest which can't be paid. They live awfully well off the interest alone. That's not bad for a con of something you don't give them at all, except a bunch of numbers. But you get real benefits, real material goods back in return at compound interest. That's how you live off it. But very few folk can actually fit. And we've seen the rise of the feminists for a long time too. That's one of the first groups, in fact, the Marxists says that they would use was the creation of feminist movements, which they did. Because you can't really destroy the family unit unless you really get a lot of women to be anti-male and so on. And they did a good job of that. Now it's taught in school as a normal thing. But then we get them promoted further into the military and so on. And then you get the CIA selects new head of clandestine service, passing over the female officer who they'd all backed for the job. And it says, this is a great thing for a testimony, isn't it? For the US. Not that the US is the only country doing this. But it's a CIA officer who was the first woman to lead the agency's clandestine service, but was also directly involved in its controversial interrogation program, meaning torture. Will not get to keep that job as part of a management shake-up announced Tuesday by CIA Director John O'Brien, it says here. It says the officer who is undercover served as director of the National Clandestine Service on an interim basis over the past 2 months, and many consider her a front-runner to keep the post, which involves overseeing the CIA's spying operations worldwide. And it says here that apparently she was figured it out. And of course, they're never going to change this system. The bankers always plunder the planet at least twice every century. At least twice every century. Look at the history. And they won't fix it because they want it to happen again, because they use it to further their power and their grip across the planet. And there'll be more crashes yet. There's some of them scheduled to come. They've already set the laws on the books so that they can plunder the accounts of the public. Now here's an example here too of progress, because under progress, as a guise to protect the crew that's doing it, they always have to stand up for everybody else under the guise of discrimination. Involved, and it leaked out somehow or another, in torturing people over in Thailand on behalf of the US in some torture facility they had there. But the thing is, it's just a great thing to be proud of or something. Equality for sadists. Think about it, folks. You understand, when we've all become, it's bad enough when we're guys doing it, but when you get women in too, it's like the game's over. There's no balance to anything now. There's no counterbalance to the nastiness. And this has been lauded, of course, as a great thing that she can do this. And then getting back to the bankers, it says, now,